Welcome to another episode of Turning the Table, sponsored by Benchmark 60. Turning the Table is the most progressive weekly videocast for today's food and beverage industry, featuring staff-centric operating solutions for restaurants and the hashtag new hospitality culture. My name is Adam Lamb, and I am a career coach for chefs and hospitality professionals at cheflifecoaching.com. And we have my co-host, Jim Taylor, Benchmark 60, here with us. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Adam. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. This is episode 117. What are you grateful for? And how would anybody know? On this episode, we'll be talking about how an attitude of gratitude can make the difference between struggling or thriving in your career and life. At the end of the show, I have a very special announcement that I'd like to share with everybody. This hashtag Lunchbox live stream is broadcast every week on Thursday at 12 noon Eastern time on the Turning the Table podcast page on LinkedIn, YouTube, and the Chef Life Coach page on Facebook. You can catch the podcast version everywhere you get your podcasts in about 2 days when I get my workflow jamming. We ask that you share the show with someone you care about who can find this information useful and leave a review. And for the audio portion of this Lunchbox live stream, you can go to turningthetablepodcast.com/listen. As always, links to the videos and other things discussed in the show can be found in the comments in the show notes. And Jim, I kind of want to start I wanted to start with a couple things that we forgot to get to last week, and that's some listener comments. So I got a DM from a guy by the name of Marcus Rep from Noble House Hotels and Resorts, and we had a conversation, and he was very generous about his praise for our conversations on the show and how it was really important that the chefs that he works with knows that it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. And I thought that was a really lovely comment. And I know that you also had somebody reach out to you and ask you what you do a podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, actually a good friend, his name is Brett, and him and I have known each other for, I don't know, since we were 12 years old or something like that. And yeah, funny, he sort of said, wait a second, you do a podcast? You know, I guess we don't promote it well enough to our closest circle sometimes, right? But,
right, exactly.
Yeah, he sent me a message saying that he'd listened to a couple of episodes and just, you know, it was taking him back to, you know, he doesn't work directly in restaurants anymore, but had a long career in hospitality and was one of those people who left, just said, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And so that was good. And then I've had another couple of really nice messages from a guy named Ricardo, who likely would be a good guest to have on here. So Ricardo, if you're listening,
great,
we're thinking about you. The message that he said actually was, I've lost track of how many episodes I've listened to because everyone, you know, just resonates really well. So happy to hear that we're talking about things that matter.
That's awesome. And before we move on about an attitude of gratitude, I wanted to just kind of pop this in because our guest last week, Jensen Cummings, threw out a quote in the show that kind of glossed over a little bit, but he mentioned this book, Radical Candor, How to Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. And I have a link for that in the show notes for Amazon. It's not an affiliate link, but I just wanted to say that since our conversation last week, I've started the audiobook version of it, and I was blown away because I recognized that it's basically the leadership handbook for the hashtag new hospitality culture. You know, a lot of things that we talk about, she summarizes in a really beautiful way, and talks about her own failings as a leader and how she was able to kind of dive into a study of like what makes great leaders. And she worked for Google and, you know, led a team of 700 and stuff like that. But I think I gained more from, you know, her stories of failures. Like she was talking about one guy that was kind of doing mediocre work, and she kind of patted him on the back and said, "Yeah, you're great, okay," even though he was falling short. And that continued on and on and on. And then the rest of her team started looking at this and going like, what's going on? She ended up having to fire him. And his question to her was, well, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you tell me where I was going wrong? Yeah. And she took that to heart. And then, so some people think this radical candor idea is an excuse to be an asshole. And this is not the case at all, because really the first quadrant of this is be a human being, bring your whole self to work, celebrate that, and know that encourage other people to do the same. Because again, we've talked about this a lot on the show, this kind of primary lie that we tell ourselves is that, we leave it all at the door, which is complete horseshit. And when we see somebody struggling, either we ignore it, hoping that they're going to straighten themselves out. And maybe I'll just say, I've done this and own it. Or allow them to struggle as some sort of, having to pay the penance of, oh, you went out and drank last night, right? Okay, cool. I'll just stand here and watch you go down in flames. But she was working from the principle, like, how do I create an environment by which people love to come to work? So she's not afraid of the L word, love, which I celebrate. And you talk a lot about, because I think most of the time when I throw a question to you about leadership, your response is like, I was challenged to create an environment on my shifts where people really loved to come to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've talked about this, like you said, a few times before. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be this thing about, make it this fluffy, place where there's no candor, like you said, there's no feedback, there's no, nothing constructive, there's no development, there's no any of, tiptoeing around making sure people just, like their experience. It's about, the supporting of people, the fact that we care about people's success, the fact that, everybody wants to learn, and part of learning is about feedback, and that whole process. But it's, I think I've mentioned this before in some of our discussions, is that it's actually more of a filter than anything else, right? Mm-hmm. Providing a workplace that people love to come to is actually a filter for how you design the experience for the employees, more than it is about creating a fluffy experience.
So talk to me a little bit more about, like when you say it's a filter, does that mean that, like, you're looking at your staff's experience from the moment they hit the door till the moment that they leave, that you're constantly trying to, like, I guess, be in their shoes, like be in their clogs, be in their aprons, be like, and take into account, like, okay, so what's their experience about?
Sure. I think it applies to, you can apply it pretty much, like I said, as a filter to any category of the business. So think about, the hiring experience or the interview process. Does it take 3 weeks to get through the interview process? Or is it something that, they know right away where they stand? When they get hired, do they actually get trained, or do they just get, here's your apron, hop online and try and figure it out?
Sure.
Here's a tray, go serve those tables, and then hold them accountable to the fact that the service wasn't good? Well, they haven't been trained. When it comes to feedback, like you said, is it direct and supportive in a way that's going to help them improve, or are we just telling them that they did a bad job? Mm-hmm. All of those, you can go down the line of different experiences thinking about, what is the staff going to love about their job, or what are they going to leave their job? And the question that I always used to ask people when I asked them, employees and people that I worked with, if they love coming to work every day, mm-hmm. I would ask them that question. Do you love coming to work every day? Do you enjoy your job? How are you doing? And then let them go about their answer. And then I would ask them, what do you tell your parents or your spouse or your friends? What do you tell them about your experience at work? Because I know what, in most cases, if they had any feedback, what they're saying to their friends and family is different than what they probably would say to me. And so we used to ask that question, and still do in certain scenarios, because it positions it differently about, like, be honest with me. Tell me about, give us feedback, because that's part of the process too.
I think it takes a certain degree of maturity in that position, that leadership position, to be able to ask that question, because you might get an answer that's directed at you in a negative way. And so how do you actually interpret that and try to glean the gold out of that, and then throw the rest of away as like being, highly emotive experience or whatever? And so I know why younger managers probably wouldn't say that, because, again, speaking for myself, taking a great deal of pride in what I do mm-hmm. and how I show up every day, and then have somebody criticize that's not my boss. That takes I guess that takes a filter of neutrality, right? Like, assuming a filter of neutrality says that I like what they're talking about, what they're saying is not really a reflection on me. It's they're talking about their experience, and I don't necessarily have to react to it. I don't have to defend myself, because I've been in those situations where someone will say something and I'll go right on the defensive and try to argue with them, when in fact they feel that way because they feel that way, and there's no other reason other than that. And by the way,
But if you're in a position of leadership, you might actually have an opportunity to do something about it.
Sure, absolutely.
We had a really interesting example actually with a restaurant group that we're working with at Benchmark 60 yesterday. And it's funny that now we're talking about this, because it was exactly this scenario, this conversation about people loving coming to work. And actually, you know, it sounds a little bit woo woo, but you know, the impact that has on the business. And so in this specific scenario, we were talking about the opportunity for this restaurant to be more profitable, or this group of restaurants to be more profitable, and found that there was something going on that was causing the average wage of their employees, when they looked at it as a whole, to be really, really high, you know, compared to what they thought they were paying people. And so we started to look at that, and we found that there was 5 employees in one location working. Each of them was working at least 70 hours a week.
Holy crap.
So, okay. So on one hand, it's causing, you know, they're paying time and a half to a lot of people for a lot of hours every week, which is just, you know, pouring money down the drain. So there's the financial side to it. But the interesting thing that was the sort of trigger for action with that group was that one of them actually said, there's no way they enjoy that.
Who does?
Right.
You know, that's like that veneration of overwork. You know, those would be the people who are like, yeah, I'm in the grind. And I saw a meme the other day, I almost burst out laughing. There's a picture of a line cook who's, you know, bragging about working 70 hours and he's in the grind. And then there's a little tagline on the bottom, like, fascinating. He's celebrating the conditions of his servitude or something like that. It's like he's all of a sudden become like celebratory of the fact that there's a system of oppression that he's bought into, and has actually taken on that as a point of pride. And before I go any further, I just wanted to say to our listeners, happy Thanksgiving. You know, it's US Thanksgiving, and you guys are working, so we are too. And I just wanted to also make note of the fact that Canadians celebrate their Thanksgiving October 11th. Is it, Jim?
Well, it's typically around that date. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't remember us ever, you know, shouting out to, I mean, Jim, you're Canadian. My wife is Canadian. There's lots of folks from Canada that actually listen to the show. And maybe we can be a little bit more attuned to the fact that other listeners from other areas have things to celebrate as well, and should be and venerated for that. And the fact of the matter is, you know, it's kind of our salute to the troops to be here. I know LinkedIn is probably a ghost town right now because everybody's, but we chose to be here because we wanted you all to know just how grateful we are for you. And
speaking for the Canadian contingency,
okay,
we're not upset about not having the happy Thanksgiving because we didn't do a show on that day.
Right.
So,
right. But I mean,
that.
Yeah. And I'm in a very unique situation this year because probably for the first time in 30 years, I'm actually at home. And so I'm at my daughter's house in Roan Mountain, Tennessee, where she's created this kind of like animal village farm, which is insanity. And I recognized that I hadn't seen my mother in about 12 years since my son got married. And so last year I was kind of dancing around the subject. Hey, Mom, maybe you want to come out? Da, 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 da. And she was watching her stepson's dogs, my half brother. And so this year I just called it and I said, I'm not going to be a victim of the circumstance anymore. Called her up about a month before. I said, Mom, find somebody to watch the dogs. I'm going to send you a flight. And she got in about 12:30 at night 2 nights ago. And we drove up here yesterday, and to see her with my 2 daughters as adults having this experience with each other, I just blown away, man. So I'm like so deeply grateful, and we haven't even got to dinner yet. It's just, I go out on the balcony and there's my mother talking to one of the girls. And instead of like interrupting them, I just kind of like walk away and allow them to have their experience, because I realize that how important it is for them, and how important it is for my mother to feel connected to them. And, you know, all of us got our own shit, and there's always a reason not to connect. And I just felt very
Mhm.
strongly that I needed to do something to kind of facilitate this connection. So, and to be frank, facilitating this connection with you today, I feel very grateful. So, yeah, that's what I'm grateful for.
Well, I mean, I think even though we went through this process, it's not a process. We have our Thanksgiving, like we said a month
Yep.
ago. But we spend a lot of time in the U.S. and with American restaurant groups, and have lots of
Yeah.
friends in the U.S. So Thanksgiving is always something. And plus, there's good football to watch today, right? So we can be, thankful for that. But, I mean, the front and center thing for me is that I've got she's 3 months old today.
Yeah.
So thankful for that.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think we started our show not too long after she was born, right? So it's kind of like been able to chronicle the whole experience of how not only, her, but the experience of your wife and the experience of you guys together. And I know we've had some phone calls at, Sunday at 10 o'clock when you're driving her around trying to get
Yeah.
But like, holy moly, what a big thing. And again, how wonderful it is that you are, as an entrepreneur, someone who can actually be there present pretty much all day long. I mean, you've got your business calls and stuff. And so I'm just kind of recognizing, in my 30 years, how, working the holidays and working the birthdays and stuff. And my children were always kind of like, yeah, Dad, it's cool. Got it. Not a problem. And yet I always had this sense of guilt inside that I wasn't necessarily present for them. And that I have such a deep connected relationship to them now. I feel like more like what a lucky bastard I am, because I know lots of folks in a similar situation that, their kids have made up a different story. And like I said, they feel how they feel like they feel. So you can't argue with that. You can't do anything about it except just to love them up. And so I encourage those who may not necessarily be having the same experience today, to make it a priority and just make it happen.
And we were talking earlier about things that we're grateful for directly related to the restaurant industry and our experience in it. And, I think we should spend some time on that, because I thought a lot about this morning, and, we talked a little bit about it before the show, but I was thinking about, it's okay. So it's Thanksgiving, and, there's, no matter what you do, you're going to be put in this position where you're going to think about the things that are going really well in your life and that you're grateful for and thankful for. And I actually ended up sort of organically going through this process in my brain of thinking about all of the amazing experiences and learnings and connections and relationships and all of that came from working in restaurants. And I think, we often on this show and in lots of scenarios talk about the challenges that exist in hospitality and the things we need to work on, and the opportunities that exist, and the 70-hour weeks, and the levels of stress and the workload and inflation and all these different things that are going on that make it hard. But I know I wouldn't be where I am today in my life if I hadn't spent as much time as I did in restaurants. I know I wouldn't be as confident speaking with people. I wouldn't be as outgoing. I wouldn't be as, comfortable with strangers. I wouldn't be married to the woman that I'm married to if I hadn't worked in restaurants.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that list for me is endless.
So we talked at the top of the show about an attitude of gratitude. And for me, again, might sound a little woo. I'm not scared of the woo. Okay. What I know is that there is a biochemical reaction that happens in the brain when you consciously choose to be grateful for what you have, like focus on that as opposed to focusing on the negative. And my experience in working in hospitality is there are so many negatives. There are so many things that it seems to be natural to want to bitch about them or to talk about them, because in one way you need to kind of get that out of yourself. So you need someone else to talk about it. But after a while, it's because it feels like, misery loves company. So everybody's kind of like at this lower vibration, for lack of a better word. And it's taken me, I've had some health challenges this year, and there have been moments where I had to shift my way of thinking around away from pain to like looking around at my house and my wife and my connections, and like having to like consciously choose to be connected to that as opposed to why things suck in my body. And what I discovered is that as soon as I started looking around about the things that I was grateful for, I found more reasons. So I'll give you a great example. My daughter loves to say FML, right? Which is short for fuck my life. Because she's like, I got all these animals, and I got to do this and that, and she's created it all on her. She somehow forgets that she made this choice, but she'll go da, 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 da. And I'm like, don't you say that. Don't you say that out loud. Don't you say that out loud, because what ends up happening is that vibration actually goes out and you'll start finding more reason to say that. And so what about like looking around and just like being grateful about where you're at, what you have. Okay, not perfect, don't have everything. Who cares? All of us can find at least one or two things today to be grateful for, and use that as a way of being. And then the next question would be like, okay, so how do you actually show that gratitude? Is it in the way of interacting with others? Do you have a smile on your face because you're remembering, just how fortunate you are? My daughter was involved in an accident not too long ago, and she came very, very close to the outcome being completely different. And she's walking around and she's healthy and she's here, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And yet I know for a lot of folks that they don't have that opportunity. So, the question is like, okay, is there something in your life that you can be grateful for? And if you continue to focus on that, can you find other things? And then how do you actually express that gratitude, either to yourself or to others? Because once that happens, everything starts to shift. I like to say, if you move energy on one thing, you move energy on everything. So, and to get back to your point about like, I could very easily look at my body and say, I did damage to my body by my conscious choice to be a chef and work in kitchens and have work on tables that were too short or too high or whatever, in bad environments or whatever. I could look at that and say, I'm a broken down chef now, because those are the choices that I made, and crap. And yet I can also look back and remember this very specific opportunity. I was connected to Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, their culinary program. And at one point they asked us, Janet Bush Miller is saying, happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Happy Thanksgiving, Janet.
Happy Thanksgiving, Janet. They asked me and 20 other chefs to fly to Houston to take part in a quorum because they wanted to reevaluate their entire culinary program. And so we're sitting in this room, and there's this very lovely, very nice woman, a facilitator, and she's got a pad of yellow stickies. And then she starts asking each one of us what we know. Like, what are the skill sets that you know, being a culinarian? And before long, the entire wall was covered with these little yellow stickies. And I looked up and I'm like, I had no idea that I knew all that, right? Like maybe I hadn't used that particular skill set or whatever, but I thought about, all those experiences that led up to that moment and all the things that I had been kind of the skill sets and knowledge that I'd been like kind of putting in my back pocket, and to see it on a wall, I was blown away. And that's when I realized that the things that I've learned as a culinarian and a hospitality professional are skill sets that are directly transferable to other areas, other careers, if I wanted to. Like I throw out the easiest one, which is project management, right? There are people who get paid big money for managing projects around certain timelines, because in the end, the product is the product, whether it's a building or it's a digital product or it's a plate of chicken. Sometimes we have to take, again, in a very neutral fashion, take our ego out of it and go, okay, so do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because some of us are really committed to that plate of chicken.
Yeah. Yeah. Project management is definitely one of those things, like we were talking about, things like communication, I think, is one of the things that I'm the most grateful for from my experience in restaurants. And whether that's communication in terms of dealing with customers, a whole bunch of them all at the same time that are all have expectations, whether it's communicating with the kitchen, because I spent most of my time in the front of house. So maybe communicating with the kitchen when things are really busy, trying to make sure that things go well for the guest, communicating with the team, giving feedback. There's all these different ways that, I'm incredibly grateful for that in terms of my experience in hospitality, because it gave me endless opportunity to practice every
Yeah.
day,
And
all day,
yeah. And, we've had some really amazing people on the show. I'm thinking about Kelly Featheringham and her book about the ABCs of leadership, where she's talking about assumptions, boundaries, and communication.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of the folks that we have come on the show come back to this central feature of, what is good communication? And I guess I would juxtapose that, like, is it good or is it effective? And so I was taught coming up that you give a shit sandwich, right? You talk about something positive, then you bring up this negative act or performance, and then you sandwich that with another piece of good news, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when I understood that it's like putting cheese on a shit sandwich. It still doesn't make it taste any better. And what I've come to understand is that people receiving that now think it's disingenuous in both ways, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can they trust the good stuff when you kind of so again, coming back to the book Radical Candor, it's like you can give direct feedback in a mutually honoring way that they understand the message clearly without confusing the situation with throwing like false praise on it. So even though I consider myself to be a good communicator, I'm finding through this show and through my own personal development so many ways to communicate more effectively, especially in my own personal relationships with my daughters, with my wife, because I know for my own sake, for my own self, that work was a great refuge. If there was crap going on at home, I could always go at work and be kind of understood and respected, and people would have to do what I say and less conflict. Inevitably, you have to come home. And so what kind of skill sets do you need in order to not only support you at home, but also at work? So I think that's a great quandary, great inquiry to be in, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the shit sandwich thing, kind of a funny one, that I did a lot of multi-unit management. And the joke that we always had amongst that group or that team was we always used to say to each other, don't be a seagull.
Wow.
Don't be a seagull. Don't fly in, shit all over the place, and fly out. And it resonated always really well with me, partly because I just think it's kind of funny, but it really, again, there was that filter of don't just show up at the restaurant one day out of 20, give a bunch of, feedback, quote unquote, and leave to not be seen again for 20 days. Nobody's going to enjoy their experience when the district or regional manager shows up if they're a seagull. Right. So, that was always a good one for me. And then the other thing, speaking of sort of being grateful for things, we used to do this exercise, which I think I've been, I was thinking about this morning before we got on the show. I want to challenge everybody who's listening to us now or listens to us down the road, or, I'm going to intentionally do this today. And, Adam, you should do this too. Or here's my challenge to you. We used to do this exercise where we would in group sessions or in boot camps with people or, conferences and stuff, we would say, okay, everybody pull out their phone. And, usually we're in those meetings and those types of things, we're telling everybody to put their phone away, right? Get off your phone. We say, okay, pull out your phone. I want you to send a message to somebody that you care about, thanking them for something, telling them that you love them, or telling them that you're grateful, or telling them, thank you for this or that. And then we used to ask for a volunteer to read out the response that they got from people. And it was always shocking, the responses that came back from people, because, you'd have someone send a message to a friend that they haven't talked to in a few months, or, something like that. And just saying, I love you and I'm grateful for you and this and that. And you've always done these good things for me. And you'd get these responses that would be like, are you okay? Do you need me to come get you? Is something wrong? Are you drunk? Are you in trouble? Like, what's going on? And it just always was a good reminder that we just don't do that stuff often enough.
Yeah, I totally get it, man. It's so powerful. And okay, so I'm good. I'm up to the challenge. I'll do that.
Yeah. And,
I'm not scared.
maybe next week when we're on the show, we should read out a couple of responses from people.
Yeah, definitely. We want them to, share them with us so that we can share them on the show. And I got to tell you, Jim, this entire experience of working with Benchmark 60 and creating this show for me has been a labor of love. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to spend this time with you every week, regardless of whether it's Thanksgiving or football, which is 12:30. I think kickoff is going on right now. Because I know that we are always focused on possibilities and solutions and how important that is, because we've had some really high flying guests that talk about concepts that may or may not be deliverable. And yet I know that we're always kind of focused on one or two or three pieces that can actually be delivered, and really encouraging other providers in the same space, other podcasters, other speakers to do the same, because all these different solutions and outlooks and perspectives matter in the long run. And that's why I was so excited to actually dig into Radical Candor, because as soon as I started reading it, because I'm in the process of writing a new book, right? And when I'm reading, when I'm listening to the book driving in the car, I'm like, oh God damn it, she talked about that. She talked about, like, now I'll have nothing to write about.
Good.
Which is cool. So I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to thank the listeners who have supported us since day one. Again, the show continues to grow in reach. Folks are, once they find the show, they're going through all the episodes. And I know that sometimes, they may get a little emotional and get a little wonky, but that's okay. At least it's real and transparent and vulnerable, which are a couple of the values that we hold to be dear. So thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, well, thank you too. This conversation that happens every week wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. So thank you.
Thank you much. Yeah, now you made me all flustered, man. Thank you for that. No, it's okay. I can be emotional. And happy Thanksgiving. I want to say thank you to all the troops out there who are in service to those who won't have to. And what you're doing is a sacred thing, man. You're providing an opportunity for people who may not have seen one another for a long time to come around a table and be in relationship. And what I know about our country, about our world right now, is that we need more relationship. We need more opportunity to get down and be with one another. And as the mediator for my second divorce said, I've yet to see somebody angry with a mouthful of food. I'll tell you that story next week. But thanks very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you again on Turning the Table.